underdogs, underestimated, we the ones.
It's the Underdogs. Jordan Brenner here with you, joined as always by Peter Keating. Peter, how is the middle of July treating you?
Well, I've come to grips with the fact that the team I've been watching every night, for a couple of months now, a few months, the whole season, the Mets are just done. So I'm kind of in a depressed, humid lull at the moment. So
you generally want to start an episode with energy, right? I feel like we just went to you live from the crypt. Anyway, we'll get to some baseball.
Because you asked the wrong question, Jordan. But I'm very excited about one thing coming up right now, which is the Women's World Cup.
That's right. We'll get to some baseball a little bit later. We're going to talk a little Formula One at the end of the show. But first, the Women's World Cup starts tomorrow. We're psyched. We're into it. If you missed, and I really, really have some issues with you if you did miss it, but if you missed our crossover episode with the Cooligans, get to Spotify or Apple Podcasts and download it immediately. It is some groundbreaking, earth-shattering stuff. In all seriousness, we had a lot of fun, and those guys are amazing. And we thank them for having us in their studio.
It was huge fun. I learned a lot, and we had a good time. I think we gave people some good nuggets. I think we can dig a little deeper now, but it was fantastic. You know what I love, Jordan? When people who aren't coming in something at all from an analytics perspective kind of end up where the numbers we think would take you also, and kind of meeting of the minds, a meeting of the fans, and it's kind of what happened. It's kind of cool.
It was serendipitous, wasn't it? But it was like a rom-com. But Peter, let's give people some more nuggets. We are excited for the start of this tournament. And look, one of my frustrations, you've been hearing me whine about this for how long? I don't know, 3 weeks. Is that
wait a minute. I think I have to break out. I think I have a small box here, the world's smallest violin. All right, I'm ready. I'm ready to play a tiny violin.
We're data-centric people, and there's a lack of data to project things for national teams in general. And
they don't play that often.
Right.
They don't play in any kind of structured setting. A lot of the games are literally called friendlies, right?
Right.
And not only that, there's not a lot of historical data. You know this, Jordan. If you go to a soccer box score, a traditional soccer box score, there's almost literally no information. If you go look up the truly groundbreaking and earth-shattering 1999 U.S. women's team final, like their championship win, you can find out how many yellow cards they had against China in the final. And find out who scored. You can't find out possession statistics or defense you can't find out anything. And the women's game, sadly, but as is so common, is even further behind than the men's game. So it is hard to get good numbers, but not impossible.
Right. Further behind in data tracking, you're saying.
Yeah.
Right. Not in quality of play, because I wouldn't.
Jordan, I don't think the women's
my plan to cancel you is coming later. I don't think
anyone would even taken out of context think that anyone meant the U.S. women's team is behind.
If you've taken Peter out of context, please tweet him at Peter Keating NJ. No, I'm kidding. I'm messing with you.
Well,
Peter.
what starts people like us into analyzing, talking, stirring up fan support, what ignites that is often good data at the bottom, right? And sadly, in a lot of fields, women's sports lag in data collection and analytics. That's starting to change. So let's do our part to make it change. Let's go.
So here's one piece of data we found that is interesting. And I think it's counterintuitive. It's the relative lack of importance of home field advantage in events like these.
Yeah, you'll find a lot of people writing that soccer teams that play at home have a massive advantage. It's usually based on somewhat out of date information. Home field advantage in soccer leagues around the world and federations seems to be declining, and pretty sharply. FIFA gives a 100-point bonus to women's national teams that play at home when they set their expectations for how teams should do. That's pretty mammoth. That's the equivalent of assuming that if you play at home, you'll win 64% of about 2/3 of the available points. The data scientists who put together things like ESPN's Soccer Power Index and other places think it's more like maybe 15 points on the ELO scale. Let me start that over again. The data scientists who put together models like ESPN's Soccer Power Index think the advantage is much smaller, maybe a quarter of that, maybe 25 points. So we're seeing a lot of, journalists who have to travel through time zones and analysts and, and bettors assume that there's this gigantic disadvantage to anybody who has to travel to play in Australia and New Zealand. They're probably overvaluing those home teams as a result. That's one.
Well, there's also sort of a recency bias of teams. I'm thinking especially in the Men's World Cup of host countries traditionally getting out of the group, but it's taking a small sample size, right? This is played once every 4 years. So if it happens 4 or 5 times in 20 years, people think, well, the host country always gets out, and it's just small sample size theater. So we're looking at you, Australia and New Zealand, 2 host countries. Peter, are you saying that they're a little bit overrated?
Let's look specifically at New Zealand.
Okay.
Here's the thing about the host countries. They don't have to play to qualify, right? They get in because they're the host countries. Mm-hmm. So whoever you think might be the worst team in this entire field, like we've talked about, can Vietnam score 1 goal in this tournament, right? Whatever you think the last of the last place teams are, Vietnam, Morocco, whoever, New Zealand is probably played worse than them this year and over the last 3 years since they got their new coach. They're 1 win, 7 losses, and 1 draw in their friendlies that they played instead of having to qualify. They scored 3 goals this year in all of their friendlies. They've given up 22. They're not good on offense. They're not good on defense. Yet, bettors have made them a very good bet to get out of the group or to survive or advance.
Right. So this is Group A, and you're talking about Norway is the heavy favorite to get out of the group. But you're right. The Philippines have no shot. So you're looking at Switzerland and New Zealand, one of those teams finishing second and getting out of the group. And Switzerland's at -150 to get out of the group. New Zealand's at -120. So you're really not getting much of an edge by picking New Zealand as an underdog. Now, to be fair, Peter, there's not a massive difference, only about 65 points in their FIFA ratings.
Yeah, but Jordan, but wait a minute. One of those is with an arrow. How many teams can you say this about who qualifying for the World Cup is usually a triumph? Mm-hmm. New Zealand right now is number 26 in the world. That's their all-time low in FIFA ratings. They peaked at about, I think, number 16 in 2015. They've been on a trajectory downward. I really think, I love New Zealand as a country. I've been there. Beautiful, pretty place. I have nothing bad to say about the country. But I think they might be playing the worst sustained stretch of any team, the worst of all of any team in the field. And I think it's basically their betting line is due to overinflated home field advantage. The group looks chalky.
So you're saying
I think Switzerland, yes. We got to go with Norway and Switzerland to make it out of that group. But that group is chalky. This actually has even more of an impact in Group B, where the other host, Australia, is a very strong team, is one of the top 10 teams in the world, and is the favorite to win the group on betting lines. But Canada ranks even higher than Australia in the FIFA World Ratings. Canada is the defending Olympic champion. Canada faced Australia twice last year in Australia, won both matches. Again, we're hearing a lot of stories about, the travails of traveling to Perth in news accounts of this World Cup, right? That should not necessarily translate into Canada being any kind of underdog. Now, look, is Canada's federation in financial mess? Yes. You can say the same thing.
All right, let's stop for a second. One of the things we look for in general in upsets, we've learned, is chaos.
Yes.
Generally creates a good recipe for an underdog. And yes, please get into all the reasons why everything in Canada is chaotic, and we're not even talking about the wildfires.
Well, they've had a situation is literally hard to see, but they've had a bunch of injuries. Their financials, their federation may go bankrupt. That's the latest news. They're in severe financial distress.
By the way, and that's sadly not at all unique in this tournament.
I think that's
you go through the groups, and it's this team's dealing with disarray in their federation. That team's dealing with disarray in their federation. It's really heartbreaking, I think, is the word I'd use for such an amazing event, a sport that has grown to such a degree that, and what we've seen in the U.S., right, getting equal pay for the women's team, that so many other countries are still fighting this uphill battle. But go on about Canada.
Well, I think that's actually
I'm off
no. I think that's actually a really important point, because there's half a dozen teams in this field who are going through some kind of chaos or disarray due to conflicts with coaches, conflicts with federations, countries not paying their team members the bonuses they promised, all these kind of things. But if there ever a year where that wouldn't necessarily be enough to take a team down, it would be this year, because 5 or 6 of the top teams are having some of the same problems going on, right? So if there's ever a year where you're not at a relative disadvantage because you're having some kind of internal conflict, it's probably this season. More important, Jordan, we've also found that in soccer, taking extra risks to stop the other team from scoring even one goal, that's what triggers upsets. When you look back 4 years ago, who had the crazy results in the groups? Cameroon, Italy, Nigeria, teams that played counter-striking, counter-attacking styles. When underdogs win in soccer, it's not because they suddenly develop some unforeseen scoring potential or because they take control of the ball. It's usually because they can't stop their opponents from possessing the ball for 60 or 70% of the game, but they do obstruct well enough to get chances and limit their opponent's chances, especially shots on target. Canada does that fantastically well. The 9 games they played to qualify, 4 they gave up 1 goal, 5 they had shutouts.
Right. And we're not saying they're the favorite to win the tournament, but at plus 3,500, they're worth a long shot bet. This is the Underdogs podcast after all.
That's a long odds for one of the top 10 teams in the world.
All right, Peter, we're getting the note from our producer, Sarah, who you will all hear from later in the show, that we're running short on time for this segment. So real quick, let's run through a few of our other favorite underdoggy picks for this tournament. First of all, in general, we feel like the Asian teams are being a little bit underrated, maybe because of lack of information, lack of games against other areas of the world. So I think we're both eyeing China in Group D, who are plus 200 to qualify from the group, maybe to get past Denmark, who's minus 300. You're still on that one?
Yeah, the numbers say that Denmark and China are basically a coin flip, but bettors are heavily favoring Denmark. We think there's value in China, probably just because they're not as well known. That's probably why the betting lines are set that way.
Same thing, South Korea and Colombia vying for second and third in Group H. Presumably Germany is going to win the group. And South Korea actually has better odds at minus 105 than Colombia's minus 150. But South Korea is higher in the FIFA rankings. I've seen some people saying, oh, they haven't done well outside of Asia, this, that, and the other thing. I'd rather ride with South Korea at minus 105 than Colombia at minus 150.
Same situation. Don't take those really well-known teams that are rated high on the betting lines because essentially they're really well-known at face value. I'll also just throw in Ireland. Ireland plays that kind of great obstructionist defense. Looks like they have 7 players back most times. They play that counter-striking skill. And they held the U.S. to 2 very narrow wins on American soil this spring. They're going to be really tough for any overdog.
Right. Well, we're going to probably get back to you with some more data once the group stage is done and we have a beautiful 16-team knockout bracket where we can really look at the styles that win in a one and done scenario. But so look forward to that in a couple of weeks. So Peter, who's got a shot to make a big late season run and climb into the playoffs? And I know you're excited about one team.
Well, I'm confident about one team. They're not necessarily the easiest team to get excited about because they're not plucky underdogs. They're underachieving overdogs who are about to take off. Of course, I'm talking about the Padres. The San Diego Padres, like you could probably win bar bets on this right now. They have the 3rd biggest run differential in the National League, right? You got Atlanta, you got the Dodgers, and then it's not the Phillies or Phoenix or the Brewers. It's the Padres, but they're stuck at 45 and 50 because they've been horribly unlucky. Now, look, sometimes there's reasons why you lose close games. If your bullpen's having a terrible year, if your manager can't pinch hit his way out of a paper bag, you might cost your game, a couple of games, right, for your team. It's not the case here either. Josh Hader has an ERA of 1.03. The lineup has been clumping its hits together and scoring a lot of runs. All of a sudden, Machado, Soto, Tatis hitting well at the same time. And their rotation is excellent. The guys running this team are smart. They like the team. This team is underachieving for no reason other than bad luck. They're going to, they're just going to go off and score like 70 runs some week and get right back into it.
Look, I agree with everything you're saying about they've been unlucky. They're better than their record. The run differential thing stands out, but they're, to be 45 and 50 and outscoring your opponents by 44 runs is insane. But I just wonder, have they dug themselves too deep a hole? They're 10.5 out in the division. Ship has probably sailed, but they're 4th in the division. They're 7th. They're 7.5 out for the last wild card spot. Even if they play much, much better, that's a lot of ground to make up. Are you as confident I guess, are you as confident that they're going to make the playoffs as you are that they're going to play better?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, you got to remember, looking at their stats, it's such an extreme pitcher's park that when you see Juan Soto hitting 265 with 17 home runs and 87 walks, that's a superstar season, right? He's going to have a superstar season. You put 3 or 4 superstar seasons together, then what do you need to make up 7.5 games, right? You need a starting rotation that won't go into some prolonged funk, that will give you, you know how some teams say, when we pitch well, we don't hit well. When we hit well, we don't pitch well. You know what that means? That doesn't mean you're cursed. It means you're not hitting well often enough and you're not pitching well often enough. But this team has a rotation that pitches often, like well, all the time, and is starting to hit well all the time. And that 7.5 game margin is something you can make up in a month. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I think we're on the same wavelength when it comes to pitching rotations. You said, look, the Padres are plus 400 to make the playoffs. I'm going to take a team that's plus 425 in the American League, and that's the Seattle Mariners. Now, they're a 500 team right now, 47-47. Their Pythagorean record, which looks at run differential and things like that, says they should be, they're unlucky. They've lost 3 more games than they should. They should be 50-44. They've got an inexplicable 11-17 record in 1-run games. That should even out. But my 2 biggest reasons for going with Seattle, one, their rotation is such that they throw a good young starter every day. You've got Luis Castillo anchoring the thing, but then after that, it's George Kirby, Bryce Miller, Logan Gilbert, Brian Wu. That is a cadre, if you will, of young arms who, to me, if you're looking for a team that can go on some sort of like 17-4 spurt, it's a team that's going to come out and have someone who can shut the other team down every single day. The other thing that they've got going for them is their 2 best offensive players are still underperforming compared to what is now a significant track record. And that's Julio Rodriguez and Teoscar Hernandez. Julio Rodriguez's OPS right now is below 800. It's 715, and Teoscar is not much better at 718. You have to believe that those guys are going to hit.
So here's my question. I believe a lot more in Machado, Soto, Tatis than I necessarily do about Teoscar Hernandez. Are we sure that something terrible isn't happening to Rodriguez and Hernandez? Or why should we believe that those guys will turn it around just because they're going to revert to their career averages? I mean, I'm a little worried about Julio Rodriguez.
I don't know what terrible thing could have happened to Teoscar in flying to Seattle that would cause him to have an OPS under 800 for the first time in 4 years and below 770 the first time since he was in Houston as a rookie. And Julio Rodriguez, one of the best young stars in the game. I'll believe that he's a 248 hitter with limited power at age 22 when I see this happen for multiple years.
Okay, but again, unlike Soto and the Padres, this team doesn't walk a lot. They also, where's the power in the infield and where's the bench? I mean, you got Jose Caballero bench now for who? Who
needs
Colton?
A bench? Play every day. It's baseball.
Well, who's this? Okay, so who's the everyday second baseman? Colton Wong hitting 160? Is it Ty France as your regular first baseman? I mean, apart from the big hitting outfielders, this team worries me a little bit. But I completely agree with you. They have the starting pitching, and to go on a run because they're almost never let down, right? They're never going to get blown out, putting those 4 or 5 guys out every night. And I think Brian Wu would be, if he has another nice month or two, be a cool candidate for Rookie of the Year.
Well, right. That's the fun thing, right? It's just it reminds me of a franchise known as the Mets many years ago when they were
from what season? When
they were throwing out a Jacob deGrom, a Zach Wheeler, Noah Syndergaard, Steven Matz, Matt Harvey. The future looks so bright, Peter. Multiple World Series championships, young starter every day with massive upside. And what happened?
Let me switch subjects immediately. You got a winner for the AL Central? You think someone's coming out? Who's coming out of there? See, I'm fascinated by the fact that teams now have to target approximately 88 or 89 wins to get in with the extra wild card team. But there's also at the same time a lot of parity because of all this extra intra-divisional play. So it might not be as easy to win 92 games if you need to, if you're facing good teams all the time, let's say in the American League East. But teams from both the AL Central and the NL Central could fit this bill as well. You know, I almost picked the Cubs.
Yeah.
But I couldn't do it.
Now the Cubs, and real quick, they're 44-50, but after the Padres, they're the next unluckiest team in baseball. Their record should be 50-44. It should be reversed. And you know, they're just sitting there right now, lurking, only 7.5 behind a not great Brewers team. Obviously, our Cincinnati Reds are right there in between them. It's not a terrible pick, but we're going to stay with the Padres and the Mariners to make the playoffs, plus 400, plus 425, respectively. All right, so every week, if not multiple times a week, we get a text from our producer, Sarah McCrory, saying, you know what you guys really should do is a segment on Formula One. Formula One, F1, everyone's into it. So we're doing a segment on F1, and Sarah's joining us. Sarah, what should we be looking for this week?
Well, first off, I just want all the listeners to know that I am not a rabid F1 fan. I don't even really watch, but I don't live under a rock like you two, so I know what's going on. So basically, from my very basic understanding, Max Verstappen drives for Red Bull, and he is last year's world champion. He has won, I believe, 11 in a row. He won 2 weeks ago at the British Grand Prix. He is the overall favorite. He is basically going to win it all.
He's unverstoppable.
They can't verstop him.
Yeah.
But so what makes this kind of interesting, and why I've been telling you guys to do this as an underdog story, is because 2 weeks ago at the British Grand Prix, no one expected McLaren to come close to the podium. They ended up getting second, podiuming, and fourth. So now the midfield is heating up, and instead of just chasing Red Bull, people are chasing McLaren. And kind of the icing on top of the F1 cake right now is that Daniel Ricciardo, who, for anyone who doesn't live under the rock, knows from Netflix's Drive to Survive, he was kind of America's darling of F1. He used to drive for McLaren. Then he moved to Red Bull, where he's been a reserve driver. He's kind of fallen off. He is now on loan to another team, and he will be making his debut this weekend at the Hungarian Grand Prix. I don't expect him to do much. I wouldn't put your money on him, but this midfield is really heating up, and things are getting super interesting.
Well, I don't know. Jordan, that's a wrap. What the hell else? What the hell else do we have to add to that?
We really. I
mean,
mean,
maybe you guys should pay attention to F1.
We just got Wally pipped.
Jordan, what are you doing next week at this time? Because I doubt we'll be back.
Yeah, I'll be on careerbuilder.com.
Yeah. Indeed you will. Yes. What Sarah said is totally correct. I just add one thing, is that the McLaren team has been very humble or modest about claiming credit for this big change they made. They changed cars. They've been engineering things, and they changed the car. So in the middle of the season, there's only a couple of races left before the halfway point of the season. They completely changed cars. They've been very modest about the effects. So they said, well, maybe in Britain or Austria, we did well because of the weather. The track gets hot, it can be different. Maybe it's because they were like dead runs, and so pure speed what mattered most. So in Hungary, where the weather should be cooler, and also there's a lot of turns. There's more than 70 turns in the Hungarian Grand Prix. So maybe speed isn't at a premium. So they haven't been arrogant about this. But let me tell you something that's really interesting. Their speed, the speed they've added, shows up not only in like stretches of straight off racing, okay, but in pit stops. McLaren, just based on their last two performances, have the second and ninth fastest pit stops in the entire field. Jordan, I'm talking about these pit stops taking 2 to 2.2 seconds. You gain a couple of seconds here or there on those, and you're monstrously ahead of the field. I think that McLaren has actually added speed, and they actually are the number 2 team now, and they are the team for Ferrari and Mercedes to try to beat. And so the underdog angle I like is to go for McLaren's top driver, Lando, not Calrissian, Lando Norris, who I believe is plus 2,000 to win, but a much better bet to finish in the top 6 or top 10. Way better bet than he would have been just a month ago.